Welcome to Integrity and Joy. I'm Steve Walker. This is episode 19 of Integrity and Joy. From conflict resolution to figuring out your wow, a conversation with Nobel Peace Prize nominee, Dr. Paul Williams. Welcome to Integrity and Joy. I am Steve Walker, former U.S. diplomat, activist, educator, and now life coach, meditation teacher, and podcaster. It's great to have you here. 19 episodes in. It's pretty amazing, right? It's gone by very quickly for me. But I really appreciate you being here and tuning in, and love that people have been finding it both inspirational and entertaining and helpful in their own lives. So I really appreciate that. If you're not following already, please do, wherever you get your podcasts. And if you haven't already, please leave a 5-star rating and review. The more 5-star ratings we get, the algorithm goes, oh, this one's worth listening to, and it puts it in front of more people. And I think there are a lot of people out there who would be inspired by it and helped by it. So let's get the podcast in front of more people. So thank you on behalf of us and on behalf of the future listeners that are going to get the podcast because of your 5-star rating. My guest today is Dr. Paul Williams. We first worked together, as you'll hear, back in the State Department back in 1993 when he was in the office of the legal advisor, and I was in the office of East European Affairs, and we were working on the genocide in Bosnia, which was a fiasco in the U.S. government at the time. I believe we were complicit in the genocide. It led to my resignation from the State Department. And but one of the silver linings of that time was working with amazing people, a lot of brilliant people, good people of integrity, like Paul. And since then he's gone on to build this really extraordinary career that you're going to hear about. I mean, his story and what he's done with his career path is really unique, and the fact that he is so down to earth, and his emotional intelligence, as you'll hear, is like off the charts. So he's a very reflective, insightful person. I think you're going to find it inspirational and helpful. We get into it towards the end about not only integrity, but developing critical thinking skills, figuring out what your wow is, the future of education, like some really interesting parts to the conversation. So stick with it to the end, and I think you'll want to share this one with a lot of people, because I think a lot of people would love hearing his story, and they will be inspired and be thinking maybe a little differently based on that conversation towards the end. So before we get started, let me just tell you a little bit more about Paul. He's a professor of law and international relations at American University, where he teaches in the School of International Service and the Washington College of Law. He also, as you'll hear, is the co-founder of the Public International Law and Policy Group, or PILPG, which is a pro bono law firm providing legal assistance to states, governments involved in peace negotiations, post-conflict constitution drafting, and the prosecution of war criminals. He's been involved in some of the most important, conflict resolution, peace negotiations over the last 30 years or so. And his work has been so impactful that he was nominated several years back for the Nobel Peace Prize, which is pretty amazing. So anyways, I think you'll really find his story about his own career path really unique and unusual and inspirational. And again, stick around for the conversation towards the end about AI and education and building our own realities and lives and building on your strengths. I think that may be the best part of the whole thing, but I'm sure you'll enjoy the whole conversation. So thank you to Paul in advance, and without any further ado, here's my conversation with Paul Williams. All right, Paul Williams, welcome to Integrity and Joy. It is so wonderful to see you after all these years.
Oh, thanks, Steve. I'm excited to be here.
This is great. So, Paul, start us off. You grew up in California, right? What was your childhood like?
So I grew up in Cupertino, in California. And when I was a kid, Cupertino made the news because one of my neighbors put a rattlesnake in another neighbor's mailbox. And that's the only thing that people, that's what got us on the San Francisco nightly news. Now,
Wow.
every single iPhone has the weather for my hometown, has the time zone for my hometown. I grew up in that time when my peers uh, through high school and then at university were transitioning into what is now Silicon Valley. It was Aerospace Valley before that. It was a farming community, and in a sense, that being on the cusp of that technological innovation and entrepreneurship kind of became a part of my social and my cultural
Mm.
DNA. And that's one of the sort of the childhood experiences. All my friends are still in California, and they're property rich and cash poor. But that community that I grew up with was a highly entrepreneurial community, and that's really stuck with me over the years.
Yeah, how do you think that affected you over time?
Well, it gave me a sense that there were no age limitations on what you could do. I just thought it was normal that, yeah, Hewlett and Packard in their 20s in their garage developed Hewlett and Packard. That Jobs and Wozniak, I did not know Jobs and Wozniak, but they were at the school 2 years ahead of me, that we played basketball and football
Wow.
against. And Wozniak, and Jobs went off and created Apple, et cetera, et cetera. The Google twins. And so for me, it's perfectly normal growing up that people in their late teens and their 20s build things and have an impact. And partly it's Cupertino, partly it's California, but there wasn't this notion of pay your dues, work in the hierarchy, work for the man, work for the woman for decades. There was see it, think it, build it, do it type of approach to whatever it is one wanted to do. Um, the flip side, the other thing that influenced me is my father and all of our neighbors were engineers, and they were aerospace engineers, and every single one of them told their kids, including my father, told us, one, do whatever you want in life. Two, but work for yourself. And three, don't be an engineer. Uh, so, so there was this notion of, okay, I can do whatever
Wow.
I want. I just got to make sure I work for myself, and apparently, don't be an engineer.
Wow.
And my two siblings, one's a business professional, one's a dentist, and then I do teaching and international law. We all work for ourselves, and
Wow.
we're not engineers.
That is fascinating. Wow. So when you were a kid, did you start to have a sense of what you were interested in other than engineering?
Yes, in fifth grade, in Ms. Guzman's class, we had a mock trial, and I had watched Perry Mason. I was addicted to TV as a
I
kid.
loved Perry Mason. Oh my God.
Yes, and my buddy Charles was the judge, and this is fifth grade, mind you. And since Charles was my best friend, of course, I won the court case.
So it was rigged? What? The justice system was rigged?
Turns out more realistic than I had thought it might have. But and when Miss Guzman said, okay, Paul's made his argument, and Sally had made her argument. Charles, how do you rule? Charles said, I rule in favor of Paul. And Miss Guzman said, okay, why? And he said, he's my friend. Again, fifth grade, so you got to take this all with a grain of thought. Okay, I'm ready for the legal system. And then when I went to university, I actually wanted to study political theory. My senior dissertation in undergrad was a Lockean critique of Rawls' theory of justice.
Wow.
I was a little spicy, so I subtitled it Late Nights with Cheap Cabernet. I actually put that on the cover page of my honors thesis. I'm surprised they let me graduate. I had an exchange student roommate. My roommate had a girlfriend. She went to Germany, so he went to Germany. Didn't work out, but that's another story for another podcast. But Hans Schmidt, no kidding, Hans Schmidt
Wow.
was my roommate, and his family owned a winery on the Moselle River, and he was studying viticulture at University of California at Davis, which is an hour from Napa Valley and the number one. Hans brought his homework home every night.
Wow.
Cabernet,
Wow.
Merlot, Cabernet Franc. So
You hit the
it was a
lottery.
yeah. I hit the lottery with Hans as a roommate, and
Yeah.
so it was which put me in just the right mood to do a Lockean critique of Rawls' theory of justice. But then I realized, okay, I still have to, that's fun, but I gotta pay the bills. So I harkened back to Ms. Guzman's fifth grade class and thought, okay,
Wow.
I'll go to law school.
Why did you pick UC Davis?
Um, because my best friend from kindergarten was going to UC Berkeley, and we were twins. We were the same height, the same age. I was blonde, he was brunette, and we played on the basketball team together. And if I went to Berkeley with Stuart, we still would have been twins for the rest of our life. So Stuart went to Berkeley, I went to UC Davis. He, and if you get the Californians who listen to your podcast will know that Berkeley is Cal. It's the University of
Right.
California, and then there's like other schools that are also. So when you ask someone if they went to Berkeley, they say, "Oh, I went to Cal." If you ask me, I say, "Oh, I went to Cal at Davis." Every 2 or 3 years, he buys my daughter a Cal hat, and she proudly wears it around the house. And it's like Cal, Cal, and I'm like, no, no, it's Berkeley. So then she loses it, and he sends her. Then he sends her another one.
I-
But yeah, I picked Davis because it also fit my style. And I think this is important for some of your younger listeners. Is there's a lot of talk about getting outside of your comfort zone. Yeah, 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 sure. 10 or 15 or 20%. Davis was so in my comfort zone. It was the farm school originally, literally farm, horses and plows and corn, um, for UC Berkeley. And it had that comfortable environment, and you could focus on your studies. I could focus on learning how to be social, learning how to, broaden my friend network and be intellectually inquisitive. It was very much in my comfort zone. And then over time, I've gradually expanded my comfort zone, but gradually and over time.
So what do you think, other than your exposure to wine, what do you think the biggest impacts were of your college education?
Uh, Kathy Collins, my wife.
Oh.
We and she's in the other room, so I should say that really loud. I fell in love. We ran against each other in student government,
Wow.
and we met. Get this, we met at a uh, communist polka poker party. I actually have the invitation right there. I know we're on audio, but right
Oh,
there I have
that's
the
great.
invitation. Dave Barry, who was one of our colleagues in student government, we played poker, loud polka music in the background, and all the chips were red, and everybody got the same amount, and at the end, everybody got the same amount back because it was communist.
That's beautiful.
And we ended up dating as a result of
Wow.
Dave Barry's Communist Polka Party.
And have been together ever since?
Ever since, yeah.
Wow, that's amazing.
So that's what influenced me at college. Um, I would also say, on the more serious side of it, Ed
That's pretty
Costin.
serious, Paul. Come on.
That is actually true. That is
Most important decision you make in life, right? Is life partner.
the on the other side, Marvin Zetterbaum, Joe Fracchia, Ed Costantini, John Owens, faculty members who who challenged me
Mm.
to think, but in an individual basis. So I would go to their office hours, and any one of them would say, at various points in time, right. So I know what you're going to do. You're going to memorize everything I say in class because you have a pretty good memory, and you're going to write it all down on the exam. And I know it's your exam because your handwriting is crap. And so I can tell it's you, and I'm going to give you a C, because that's what we normally do.
Wow.
People, we say stuff, they remember it, they write it down, we give them a B plus, an A minus, we send them on your way. But you seem to actually be intellectually curious, inquisitive, and I'm going to give you free reign to go outside the bounds. Since I know
Wow.
you know what I'm saying in class and I know you're going to memorize it, I'm going to give you a bad grade unless you actually think. And this is how this Lockean critique of Rawls' theory of justice was with Marvin Zetterbaum, who had basically said, look, do something different and unique. Just don't do a single political theorist critique, mix and match
Wow.
them. and use it as an excuse to weave in your own thoughts. Um,
Wow.
yeah, I took an anthropology class, and I did a Marxist critique of anthropology. And the teaching assistant who was grading it, she said to me after class, she said, "Can you come by? Let's have a chat at office hours." And she says, "I got a real problem. I don't know whether you made this shit up, or you're actually doing a mark, because I didn't realize that Mark there was a thread of Marxism in anthropology, but I didn't take that approach. I took a political theory Marxist approach to the question that we were supposed to write our term paper on. And she says, I really can't tell if you were like smoking dope and made this up, or if you actually thought long and hard about this, or if you're taking the mickey out of me, because she was actually a Marxist anthropologist. I was like, I actually am paying attention and thinking about these things.
Wow.
So Davis gave me that space. And so with my students now, I'm, I try to be completely open about what they're doing to exercise their brains,
Yeah.
because I don't know what's going on in their head. I want them to work hard. I want them to exercise their brains. I want them to be intellectually curious. I want their brains to hurt when they're done doing whatever it is they're doing. And so I'd give them a lot of leeway. Now, some of them are making it up, and others are spending a lot of time actually thinking. So Davis was great that way. It gave me the space and the opportunity to think.
Wow, that is fantastic. You don't hear that all the time, right? So it's great that you had that opportunity, and it sounds like so many professors who were kind of nurturing that expansion of your intellect. Really amazing. I
Yeah,
love
no, it's
what you tell your students. I used to tell mine, same thing. I want your brain to hurt. I want you to be angry and frustrated and confused every day. So at some point, something's got to really make you like, what? I just can't, you know?
after class, though, not before class, after class. You don't want them coming to class angry and frustrated.
No, it's after, yeah, or during, and then we'll resolve it with that beautiful critical thinking, right? All right, so Davis, and then did you go straight to law school at Stanford, right? You went to Stanford?
Yeah, I was one of those unimaginative young people who you do your undergrad, and then you go straight to law school. And of course, what do? I tell every undergrad who asks me, "Oh, 2 or 3 years, doing get some real life experience
Yeah,
before you go to law school." And then they look me up on LinkedIn and they send me like a little frowny face emoji. And they're like, "No, no, do what I say, not what I do."
exactly.
So yeah, so I went straight from undergrad to, but I did do my gap year after law school. But yes, so I went straight through to Stanford.
And Stanford, because I guess people have heard of it, right? And California, and was there another reason why?
Well, this again, my both my mom and my dad had an amazing impact on me here. So I was looking at Harvard, Berkeley, and my father said, "Well, I saw the letter come from Stanford. Why are you not mentioning Stanford?" I'm like, "Well, if I'm going to go for this particular genre, I'm going to go East Coast Harvard, and if I'm going to stay in California, I'm going to go to Berkeley." Again, this fixation with Berkeley from
Yeah,
when I was a kid.
yeah.
And my father, without missing a beat, and my mom said, "It's 12 miles up the road. You could just drive up there and spend a day." And I had so much attitude. I put my Birkenstocks on. Now, some of your listeners will have to Google Birkenstocks, but I was a bit of a beach hippie. My Birkenstocks shorts and the long sleeve Ocean Pacific shirt
Oh,
to go to check out law school. Completely fell in love with it,
wow.
and realized that something I hadn't been aware of is that depending on what you do, you create opportunities. Now, at that time, I wasn't entrepreneurial enough to create my own opportunities, but a place like Stanford just made so many
Mhm.
opportunities available. And I was like, oh, okay. Depending on where and when and how you were located at a particular place, opportunities will flow. And there were so many folks. I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself in the story, but one of my buddies, Tony Arnold, um, had a tiff with the law review. And those of your listeners who have gone to law school or in law school, there's law review and it's got structure and this, that, and the other thing. And so Tony's from Kansas. And so what did Tony do? Tony's like, well, I'm just going to create a law and policy review. It's because he wanted to have a policy dimension, and law
I
reviews are
want
no,
to.
no, no policy, just
Right.
just the law and lots of footnotes and blah, blah, blah. Of course, I tell all my students, do law review. So you learn how to do footnotes. But Tony created his own Stanford Law and Policy Review. And it was about 3 or 4 years ago, I was in a faculty meeting and they were listing off the scholarship. And the very first one they listed off was, oh, and Professor Smith was just published in the exclusive Stanford Law and Policy Review, and everyone claps. And it was
awesome.
the rest of us were like, whatever, published wherever. And I called Tony. I said, Tony, remember that thing that you created out of Peak? It's now embodies excellence. But I realized you can do those types of things. You can create your own universe. You can create your own experiences.
Did you know what kind of law you wanted to study when you went there?
Oh yeah, every 3 months I knew exactly what kind of law I wanted to study. So I wanted to be a Main Street lawyer. And I had spent 2 summers when I was an undergraduate working for a law firm, Muller and Associates. And I talked to one of the lawyers. He was a single lawyer. There were 10 lawyers all doing their own practice. And he'd gone to Stanford and he said, and I said, look, I'm thinking about, I'm really keen on Stanford now. And what are your thoughts? And he said, go to Stanford. You can do Main Street law like I do, which apparently in Cupertino now, Main Street law is big law.
Yeah, right.
And or you could do this, that, or the other thing. And so I went, and I no kidding, I said, I want to graduate from Stanford Law School, move to Marin County, which is north. Since I'm from the South Bay Area, all Southerners want to go to the north, all Northerners want to go to the south. So I want to go to Marin County and have a small one-person real estate law firm.
Wow.
And they're like, wow, that's really kind of specific. Maybe you should take a few classes like on global warming, on water law, on international human rights. I evolved from that. And I tell my students this because my students all come to me and say, Professor, I want to do international law. What's the track? And I say, shh, don't tell anybody. I teach advanced international law. I took one international law class in law school.
That's it.
That's it.
Oh my gosh.
I make a living teaching advanced international law. So don't tell anybody. So basically I went from, hey, I want to do environmental law, real estate law, to, environmental law. And then that pivoted to water law. And embarrassingly, the very first publication I did, I was a law student, protecting in-stream values, which is fish, by using water marketing, which was on the cusp of it becoming acceptable in California water law. So whenever I do every year you have to say, look, I've been cited. That one article still gets cited more than the stuff I write now because it's fish, it's California, it's water,
right.
it's water marketing, it's the whole, they're doing a lot of it now in California. And then I was going to do an externship. Stanford, because it's in California and the rest of the world is everywhere else, gives you a semester to go somewhere else and do something cool and exciting. And I thought, and I was working for legal aid at the time as a work study, doing temporary restraining orders for abuse and whatnot. I thought I'll take a semester off and I'll work full time at the legal aid clinic. And my buddy Andrew Mackay Johnson, who was Canadian, said, no, you can do that your entire time at law school as internships and work study. Go to Europe. And I said, and do what? And he said, get a URL pass. And I was like, I'm pretty sure I'm not going to get credit for getting a URL pass. And he's like, yeah, I know, but find someplace and then get a URL pass and travel around and see Europe. So I sent out in the old days, you put stamps on a letter, you mail it. And Jury Toman, who was the acting director of the Henry Dunant Institute on Lake in Geneva, right there on the lake. Wow. It's now the Humanitarian Dialogue International. It does mediation. He rang me up and said, hey, come to Geneva and be my intern. I'm like, can I get a URL pass? And so I popped over to Geneva.
Wow.
Rode up into Jerry's office. And Jerry said, right, so you've got 2 topics for your book. You can write on this, or you can write on prisoners' rights in the UN Human Rights Committee. And I said, oh, well, Jerry, you're writing the book, and I'm going to help you do research. Which one are you? Which one do you want help on? He said, no. You're going to write the book. I was like, wow. You do know I'm a second-year law student. He's like, yeah. But you're going to be here for 6 months. You should write a book. Wow. And so I ended up, under Jerry's guidance, writing my single authored book on the human rights, on prisoners' rights in how they're being addressed at the United Nations Human Rights Committee.
Wow.
And again, I thought, well, if Hewlett and Packard can start this thing in their garage, and if Jobs and Wozniak can build, I can certainly just write a book. How hard can that be? And then I came back, and John Barton, who was the taught international human rights course, which I had not taken, his human rights course. He said, "You know what? You should give a guest lecture in my course." I was like, "No way, man. My
Wow.
peers will mock me if I'm a student up there giving wearing a
Right.
tie
Right.
and giving guest lectures. No, no, no. Just take an hour. My class is 2 hours. Take the first hour and give a lecture on human rights in the United Nations system."
Wow.
And then that's when I realized, oh, okay. It was a crap lecture, but but it sure as heck went on my resume the next day. But then I realized, oh, this can be done. You can do this. These things are within, you know, everyday reach of, a kid from Cupertino from UC Davis.
Wow. And that not all learning is in the classroom, right? Yeah.
Oh, very little learning takes place in my classroom.
Right.
I will not be sharing this with my students. Yeah, no, it's all of that. It's the
Yeah.
classroom gives you the skills and the perspective, and then you go out there in life and you learn and you build these things.
Right. So were you hooked on international law at that point, or what were you thinking?
No, so after I graduated, I spent a year in Colorado working for Justice Erickson on the state Supreme Court. Now most law
Wow.
students aim for circuit courts as a way of teeing you up for the Supreme Court. But since I still wanted to do water law, I went for Justice Erickson was gracious enough to bring me on as his clerk. And Colorado is important because it's on the Continental Divide, and so it has appropriative rights as well as riparian rights. And the water law cases, they have a special court system for water law, and then it goes straight to the Supreme Court, skips the appellate court, or back in the day it did.
Wow.
And since Erickson was the guy who knew, he knew criminal law, he did the capital punishment cases, he also did the water law cases. It gave me a chance to hone
Mhm.
that skill set, so that I could then build a practice doing water law, which did not turn out to be the case.
Yeah. What happened?
So what happened was I'm a Gemini.
Oh, me too.
So I'm a June Gemini, rising Aquarius. So I have an innate ability to have many different conversations in my head at the same time. So I went on the job market and I applied to big law, New York, Wall Street firms, because that sounded cool, wearing a suit every day and going to Wall Street. And then I was considering an offer from the Department of Justice, Land and Natural Resources, which is my
Huh?
passion. And then on a fluke, I applied to the Department of State because one of my buddies was applying to it and he had to fill out a security clearance form and he was asking me all these questions. And let's just say by the time Michael shared his background with me, I was like, "Wait, Mike, you're not going to get a security clearance." So by the way, what are you applying for? He was a little older and spent more time in the 60s than I did. And he explained it to me. I thought, oh, okay, I'll interview for that. And I ended up getting the offer. And when I spoke with the hiring committee chair, David Stewart, I said, David, I'm really excited about this at the State Department, but I'm also considering natural resources, DOJ, and I'm considering law firms. And he said, "You'll have more fun here." I'm like, "Yeah, fun, fun. That sounds good. I want to have fun. Okay, I accept your offer." And when I went into my parents, they're like, "Wait, wait, wait. You're turning down
What?
law firm job to go have fun at the state? Did you take any classes on international law?" I'm like, "Yeah, remember, Dad, that one class I took?" And when I went to
Wow.
Geneva, it's like, "You went to Geneva to take the train everywhere and see things." So I ended up showing up at state, and then never underestimate serendipity. So I show up at the State Department, and there's only three lawyers in the Office of European and Canadian Affairs because it was the sleepy bureau. Now, of course, you're
Mm.
thinking Canada, 51st state, how could it have been sleepy? But that was quiet. And the Europeans, we had a NATO office that dealt with NATO. We had our the ones that dealt the bilateral, the British, the French, the German, those departments all dealt with it. So we just kind of twiddled our thumbs. I showed up a week after you were there at the same time, Steve. I showed up a week after the August coup in the former Soviet Union,
Wow.
and Todd Buchwald, my boss, came in and said, "Right, so Miriam's taking OSCE. Do you want Yugoslavia or Soviet Union? I'm
Wow.
like, you do realize, Todd, I'm 24 years old and I'm a water law expert. I just happened to be here because Dave said it was going to be fun. Um,
Wow.
and then Todd, and you know Todd well, he ended up eventually being the U.S. ambassador for war crimes. He got pulled into a lot of his work that he had done. He'd been in political military earlier, so he got pulled into a lot of the nuclear things along those lines.
Wow.
And all of a sudden, and you may have been at this meeting. Tom Niles, who was Assistant Secretary for European Affairs, had a meeting. I grabbed my yellow pad because that's what lawyers do. I went, I sat against the back wall. I think you were sitting there at the table. And he said, right. So the Ukrainians, of all things, have requested that we recognize their independence. I'm like, oh, this is going to be interesting. This is going to be fun. And he said, is there a lawyer, someone from L, the legal office here? And I raised my hand. He's like, right. So what should we do? And I'm like, what do you mean? I just brought my yellow pad to take notes. And he said, well, they want to know if we should recognize them. Doesn't law say something about it? And of course, being the skilled lawyer that I was, I said, well, it depends. Do we want to recognize them? And he said, yes, but not now. And I said, well, there's four criteria: territory, population, government, which is sovereign, and sovereign is dependent upon whether you're actually recognized or not. So we can say, yes, you have a territory, population, and a government, but you're not yet sovereign. Go work things out with Moscow and with Yeltsin, which they eventually did. And then 3 months later, the Americans and everybody else recognized them. But that was that realization that, wow. And then in that one class I took on international law, we spent 20 minutes on state succession because Professor Barry Carter, who was actually a Georgetown prof visiting at Stanford. So not only did I only take one class, it was from a visiting professor, who basically wanted to hang out in California for a year. And he said, well, this whole state succession, this is decolonization. It doesn't happen anymore. State recognition, it doesn't happen anymore. But you kind of got to know the basics. And then in 20 minutes, he ran through it all. I practiced law for 2 years based on those 20 minutes of law school. And so I share that with my young professionals that I know, because it's serendipity where you end up. And it's not your knowledge base, it's your skill set, and it's your approach to intellectual puzzles, to peace puzzles, to intellectual conundrums, to intellectual Gordian knots. That's why you get paid the big bucks, or in the case of the federal government, not so much the big bucks. But you were there at the same time, Steve. You were dealing with that whole dissolution of Yugoslavia, Soviet Union,
Yeah.
and
But it's
the policy approach to that.
amazing when you think about it, for anyone who didn't live through it. But, you come in and, Europe's the sleepy part of the world. And then within, say 2 years, 1.5 years maybe, you had the creation of the EU, the dissolution of the Soviet Union, the violent breakup of Yugoslavia, right? I mean, like, it's all happening at the same time.
And it was the foreign policy establishment in Washington, D.C., completely unprepared for change in general. There's a real bias against change, a bias towards the status quo, which which impacted your approach to advising policymakers, and completely unable to deal with rapid change.
No, yeah, and I think the one thing when I was an intelligence analyst, 90 to 92, dealing with all that stuff, at least Jim Baker was the Secretary of State, and his counselor was Bob Zellick. And Zellick was a big thinker. And so I used to get my memos back from him with all the margin notes. We'd go back and forth in the margin notes. So at least I felt like there's somebody up there who's really trying to think creatively and out of the box. And so at least that was good. But it was
reading it, thinking about it, thinking creatively, trying to get their head out of the legal advisor at the time, Ed Williamson. He was phenomenal. He was look, I'm Jim Baker's lawyer. He's asked us these legal questions. Paul, don't give me any policy. He's got Steve, he's got Zellick, he's got everyone else to be thinking about the policy. Our job is to be Jim Baker's lawyer, and let's color within our lines. And let's be clear. when there's a clear line and when it's a dotted line. And so Ed was phenomenal as a legal
Wow.
advisor.
What did you like the most about that job?
Every single day, I couldn't get to the office fast enough.
Mm.
Uh, my wife was in business school, so she wasn't home anyways. She was always at the library or in class or doing her externships, back working for MCI at the time. But I couldn't get into the office fast enough. And I would also go in on the weekends. And one of my friends early on said, "Well, wow, you've got work to do this weekend." And I said, "No, but if I'm there." And the central office, the one on the seventh floor, I'm drawing a blank on the name, the
That's
operations center.
operations day. Yeah.
Yeah, if the operations center gets in a call, and I'll tell you about the defecting ballerinas in just a second.
Ooh,
If the operations center gets a call and it comes in, and Ed was always there. Ed was working 7 days a week because if you're Jim Baker's lawyer, you're
yeah.
7 days a week. And he got in the habit of knowing that he could always ring down to my office, and I'd be down there,
Wow.
and then get pulled into exciting issues because when countries are dissolving, when it's Soviet Union, Yugoslavia,
Yeah.
things are popping 7 days a week. And so that enthusiasm, and that's what I've tried to find things to do for the rest of my life that keep that high energy and that enthusiasm. So the ballerinas. So I was hanging out late on a Friday night, and the operations office calls down and says, "Are you a lawyer?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I'm a lawyer." And they said, "We have two ballerinas who are standing in the middle of the street in Washington, D.C. and are defecting. What are we supposed to do?"
Wow.
This was the DC police had called. And my first answer was, "No, no, no, no. We like the Russians now. This is Yeltsin. The Soviet Union solved. Yeltsin is where it's like, no, you can't defect. We like them.
I want to go home.
But yeah, I want to go home." And I looked. I was on the inner courtyard, and I looked over, and I saw that David Stewart, the guy who had hired me, was in his office, and he did LHRR. He did human rights. So I said, "Hold on a second," and I ran over to David's office, and I said, "David, we got two ballerinas who want to defect." And he's like, "Where the heck did you find two ballerinas who want to defect?" I'm like, "No, no, no, it's on line 40, line 46." And then the two of us walked through,
Wow.
and they ended up actually defecting and getting asylum in the United States. So it doesn't just happen on TV.
Wow. And did you like how what was it like learning on the job? I mean, again, you had your 20 minutes that you were milking, right? But like how did you learn? Was it just going to the different people in the office who knew more than you, or like how did you fill in the gaps in your own expertise?
There were a couple of different dimensions of that, which I oftentimes try to share with my students as well. One is understanding that knowledge is timeless. And this is why I like being a lawyer, because precedent matters. And so the first stop was to go to the library. And look, last time things dissolved, the Austro-Hungarian Empire,
Right,
the Kingdom of Norway and Sweden, who knew there was a kingdom? And they would sort out treaties, recognition, diplomatic relation. And on one hand, there's this, things are breaking on the nightly news, and I'm reading about the Austro-Hungarian Empire and what they did with treaties. And
Wow.
then there's this Montevideo Convention about recognition of states that nobody really cared about. And then there's this old principle of Uti Possidetis, which was decolonization. They didn't want to redraw all the boundaries. So
Right.
all of these lines didn't make any sense. They said, well, if the British and the French drew the line and you become
Too
independent,
bad.
that's your boundary. Got a better idea? And nobody had a better idea. So Uti Possidetis. And so you're like, well, when the British and the French, and they're like, what? When did you go to law school? 60 years ago? But then the flip side was the intense pool of talent that existed in the Office of Legal Advisor. And this is where I met Mike Scharf, and he eventually became with me the co-founder of PLPG. Mike popped into my office one night with two calzones and said, "This calzone's for you. And here's this draft security council." I didn't know the guy. And he said, "And this is this draft security council resolution that I was told I need you to get to sign off on." And I said, "So you're bribing me with a calzone so I can clear your security council resolution?" And I probably should have paid more attention to it because it was the Security Council resolution that imposed the arms embargo on
Oh,
Yugoslavia,
wow.
which I then spent a number of years subsequently arguing was illegal
Yeah,
Security Council resolution because it was
illegal.
ultra virus beyond the authority of the security, because they applied it to Bosnia. Yugoslavia dissolved. They applied it to
Right.
Bosnia. That's illegal. And they're like, what moron wrote this? I'm like, Mike Scharf wrote it.
Yeah.
I just cleared off on it. But
And
I
whose
realized
calzone stains are this on the
exactly.
resolution?
Uh, but I realized that Mike had this incredible depth of knowledge
Mm,
about how the Security Council worked, about how the nuance, the drafting of Security Council resolutions. He was also eventually one of the leads on the rules of procedure and evidence and the statute for the Yugoslavia Tribunal.
right.
But there's look to your left, look to your right. There's brilliant people, a lot smarter than I am. And so build those professional relationships, tap into that knowledge, have give and take and to and
Yeah,
fro. And that was a way that I found my peer group. The senior leadership, they're great and they've got perspective, et cetera.
right.
But the peer group in the Office of Legal Advisor was incredible.
Yeah. And so how long did you stay there and why'd you leave?
Because I did not want to respond to FOIA requests. The State Department has this crazy system where they have these amazing legal positions, like the one I had. And then they have the general counsel's office for the State Department, which includes a real estate bureau, a personnel bureau, and something called management, which the newest person to the management bureau does Freedom of Information Act requests, which the answer is no, no, no. Here, find ways where you're not going to respond to these Freedom of Information Act requests. And so my 2 years were up because you rotate every 2 years. My 2 years were up, and the front office from the legal office called, we've got a great position for you. When you leave, you're going to rotate into when you leave EUR, you're going to rotate into the management bureau. And I was like, yeah, what other options do I have? And I'd been thinking at the time, because as I mentioned, I went straight through from undergrad to
Right.
law school, that I wanted to do some gap time. And so I'd applied to the University of Cambridge for a PhD and also Fulbright. And the best phone call in my life that I ever received was from my now good friend, Alison Corbett. And she called up with this amazing Scottish accent. And she said, I can't do a Scottish accent, but I can't do it. But she called up and said, "This is Alison Corbett from the Fulbright. You need to get back to us. Are you going to use your Fulbright for Oxford or Cambridge for your PhD for 3 years of funding?" I was like, yeah. So I called in sick, and my wife Kathy and I spent the whole day just thinking through. And of course, you're like, do we want a green apple or a red apple?
Yeah, right.
They're both great. We picked Cambridge in part because Malcolm Grant, who was in charge of the Land Economy Department, which was environment, natural resources, and law, was a superstar individual, and so I decided to go study with Malcolm, and I did my PhD on international environmental disputes in Central and Eastern Europe. Because
Wow.
again, looping back to the environment. So again, same thing. Folks will introduce me as having a PhD in conflict resolution. I'm like, no.
Yeah.
I do that for a living, but my PhD is actually in transboundary environmental disputes in Central and Eastern Europe, of which there really aren't anymore because they all became members of the EU and there's a green collapse and they sorted out their issues. So I'm not making a living on my PhD thesis, but it gave me a chance to spend a lot of time in Central and Eastern Europe in the mid 90s, which was an interesting and dynamic time to be in Central and Eastern Europe.
Right. And you had now eventually you're going to start your own nonprofit, right? What but those seeds of that work start during the Bosnia genocide, right? I mean, you and Mike did the memo that we used to get everybody in Congress basically to eventually sign on to lifting the arms embargo on Bosnia, right? That, as you referred to earlier, invalidated the UN embargo that you and Mike had so brilliantly written. And then you were also working with us in terms of providing ongoing kind of legal advice to us and the Bosnians, who were trying to save their country. How was that going on at the same time you're doing your PhD, and how did that become something that eventually became your kind of lifelong passion?
Well, my supervisor, Malcolm Grant, was also a Gemini. We always had many things going on, and so I said, "Hey, Malcolm, would you like to be on my advisory board for my nonprofit organization?" He's like, "I thought you were writing a PhD on Central and Eastern European environmental." He said, "Yeah, that too, but I want to do these other things." So what happened was, you and others worked with Mike and I, as we were all former lawyers, former foreign service, all former State Department folks, basically critiquing what the American policy had evolved into, which was, to a degree, complicity and genocide. So we were doing that work, staying engaged. And then because I couldn't mind my P's and Q's, I popped off in an op-ed by the Tablet, which was a Jesuit newspaper. One of my friends was one of the editors, and he said, "Hey, how about you write these views?" Because we would be having conversations over beers. He was at Peterhouse in Cambridge at the college there, and I wrote this op-ed basically saying, "Hey, look, the Americans and the Brits are complicit in the genocide because of the arms embargo." Turns out the Foreign Secretary, Douglas Hurd, is an avid reader, was an avid reader of the Tablet.
Oh my God.
So, so he wrote a reply. He called up the editors of the Tablet. This isn't the Telegraph or the Times or the Guardian. This is the Tablet, and wanted to do a reply, not
Wow.
realizing that I put Fulbright research scholar instead of PhD student. I put former State Department lawyer, Fulbright research scholar. He didn't realize I was like a 25-year-old,
Yeah.
popping off. And then, of course, the Tablet opened the space for other bigger minds than mine, great minds in the UK who wanted to have this conversation as well. So all of a sudden, there's all this
Wow.
attention. I end up on the Jeremy Paxman show, and again, my second media interview. My first media interview was with Peter Jennings, and my second was with Jeremy Paxman. It's
Wow.
been all downhill since then. And then the Bosnians rang me up and said, "Hey, would you come to Dayton and be our lawyer because you share our views. You're actively engaged." This was Mo Sashabe, who was the foreign minister at the time. And I said, "Sure, but don't you have lawyers?" And he said, "Yeah. Our chief lawyer, Professor Trinka, is going to be there, and his specialty is the socialist regulation of economic enterprises."
Oh, that's
Brilliant
perfect
guy.
for peace negotiations.
I'm like, well, mine's environmental issues in Central. Like, okay. And I realized at the time that no one has repeat experience on peace
Mhm.
negotiations. If you're unlucky enough that your country has to bring you into a peace talk, you really hope it's your last. And no one's going to hang out their shingle and say, "Oh, I do peace talks in my country," because one, that's a bad omen, and two, you get one client one time. When I was at Dayton, I was in regular communication with you and others and Mike Scharf, and informally had this network of talent to tap into, and realized how valuable it was for legal analysis, but also for critical thinking. When Richard Pearl came to Dayton, Mo Sashabe said, "Well, Richard Pearl's coming in today. You need to brief him." I'm like, well, Richard isn't going to do the legal work. Why? I'm happy to brief Richard, but it's like, no, because you track everything in that very pedantic way that you do, and you know what's going on. And I've never heard you be polemic or engage in hyperbole. And
Mhm.
Richard's going to want an hour of somebody telling them exactly where things stand, because he showed up like 3 or 4 days. He'd just come in from the Czech Republic at the time.
And Richard
Um,
Pearl, just for the listeners, Richard Pearl had been Assistant Secretary of Defense under Reagan and was on our steering committee. So he was very involved in sort of the opposition to the Bosnia policy. Would eventually go
I
on.
think
I
you
mean, he
guys
was,
sent him.
yeah,
I
he
think
was
you guys
very,
sent him to Dayton.
yeah. He eventually, I think under the second Bush administration, he didn't have a formal position, I don't think, but he was a very influential advisor in the second Bush administration too. Anyways, so,
Yeah, he was on the Department of Defense's advisory board. They
right,
created
right.
bring great minds to think through this. Um, And I learned something very valuable from Richard. We had there's a NATO annex. It was called the I-4 Annex Implementation Force. General Wesley Clark, who was a three-star at the time, his lawyers had drafted it up. And Richard and I sat down to take a look at it. And I thought, okay, Richard's going to have a few comments, then I'll burn the midnight oil and go through line by line. Richard sat there and went through this annex on implementation force line by line by line with me for 3.5, 4 hours.
Wow.
And I was like, I was stunned. I was stunned at his immediate dedication to being focused on every single line. Um, and I thought, well, that's what I was the young pluck lawyer supposed to do. And if the senior person is doing this, I want to carry this through the rest of my life. That no matter how sort of we become senior, not because of wisdom and skill, but time marches on and we become senior. That there is, you still want to read everything. And I now to this day I'll tell my students, one of these things they sort of think I'm a little kooky when I say this, and then later they'll come back and say, you know what, you said that, and that actually made a lot of sense. I say, look, half your value as a lawyer, you actually read things. Everybody else knows what they say, but they haven't read it, or they read it a long time ago. And so simply by reading the Security Council resolutions, reading the treaties, reading the ceasefire agreements, that's part of your value. This turned out to be very valuable because a couple of days later, or at some point, Richard was doing something on the air base, and General Wesley Clark needed to meet with the Bosnians to go over the I-4 annex. And Mo said, okay, Paul, you go and you meet with General Clark and go through our comments on the I-4 annex. And I said, Mo, that's great, because I was a member of the Bosnian delegation. I said, that's great. I'm happy to do that. But I'm not a Bosnian. I can't just go and negotiate with Wes Clark in the I-4 annex. I need to go with a Bosnian. He said, oh, well, here, take Melita. I'm like, Mo, she's the translator, and she's great and wonderful, but I don't think I need a translator. She said, no, but she's Bosnian, so we'll have our Bosnian representative at the. I was like, all right, if this is how this works, I'm happy to go. But it was those types of things that I realized, okay, it's the skill set, it's the energy, it's the enthusiasm. And then when I came back, I am remembering your question. When I came back to London, the Macedonian ambassador, I saw him at the Croatian Independence Day celebration, and he had said, oh, Paul, President Gligorov, we have issues in Macedonia with the Greeks because of the name, etc. Alexander the Great. And was he Macedonian or was he Greek, or, that kind of stuff. We would like to engage your firm to advise us. I was like, yeah, my firm. So the next day, my wife and I went to the Round Hill pub in Windsor. She had a place in Windsor because she was working for Accenture there. And we had a couple of pints of Old Speckled Hen, which is the Berkshire brew, where Windsor's located. And she says, okay, you need to create a global pro bono law firm. I'm like, sweetie, pro bono? She's like, yeah, nobody's going to pay you to do this. So you might as well just do it pro bono. And I said, well, Global Pro Bono Law Firm, Public International and Policy Group, that's not very catchy. She's like, you're 29 years old. You don't want to be catchy. You got to sound serious. So we did that. I called Mike, who was teaching in Boston. I said, Mike, guess what? We just created a global pro bono law firm called the Public International and Policy Group, and you and I are the co-founders. He's like, okay. And then we reached out. When you look at our founding members, it's an interesting mix. We reached out to 10 of our former alumni in the Office of Legal Advisor, and who were teaching, had left state, were teaching, and had them. And then I reached out to my my PhD cohort at Cambridge, which included Dapo Akande, who looks like he'll be on the International Court of Justice starting next year with his term. We also have an Irish ecclesiastical historian, a European Napoleonic historian, because these are my drinking buddies. I needed a group of people to be founding members of PILPG. We have someone who's an expert in the Rhineland. He's expanded beyond the Rhineland since then.
Fortunately.
But it's a Polish historian, but it was mostly historians, I guess. It was a very eclectic mix of folks, but it gave us that global persona from the get-go. And then it just grew over time to this massive organization that it is now.
How did you fund it?
I got great advice from Mort Abramowitz.
Mm.
Mort Abramowitz. So back to the story. At the Windsor Hotel, no, at the Willard Hotel, Richard Pearl, Mort Abramowitz, and I were on a panel. Before the panel, we were getting some coffee and tea, and Richard Pearl turns to Mort and says, "Mort, Ed Williamson just made an offer for Paul to join him at Sullivan and Cromwell doing corporate law." Again, I'm a Gemini, so sure, right, corporate law, sign me up. And Mort's like, "That's great." And Richard said, "No, no, Mort, you can't let Ed have him do corporate. You got to give him a position as a senior associate at the Carnegie Endowment." And Mort's like, "Okay, call my secretary Betsy and she'll set up an appointment." I went to see Mort 2 days later, and Mort said, "Great. So Richard says I got to interview you for a job, senior associate position at this think tank, Carnegie Endowment for International Peace." I said, "Yeah, Mort, I'm really excited about looking at the modern law and policy of state succession based upon Yugoslavia, Soviet Union, da da da." And he says, "I don't give a shit about that crap. Don't you run some global pro bono law firm?" And I just happened to have the quarterly report that I was going to send around to our 20 members. I literally took out the envelope, opened it up, and said, took off the cover page, and said, "Oh, Mort, here's our quarterly report. This is what we do." And by then we were working for Estonia, Macedonia, the Bosnians, a little bit for the Kosovars. And Mort was great. Mort said, "I'm going to give you a 2-year position at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. You're fully funded, and you're going to do two things. You're going to build Public International Law and Policy Group into a global pro bono law firm, and you're going to look for a job." I'm like, "What do you mean?" And he says, "You must have a day job. Otherwise, you spend the rest of your life trying to raise money for your NGO and not actually doing your NGO." And then Mort did something very nice. He said, "And you got to get some law firms to give you some free legal work. So go see my friend Lloyd." I'm like, "Sure." Lloyd, so yeah, Lloyd Cutler, over at the law firm Wilmer Cutler and Pickering.
Wow.
Lloyd Cutler was Jimmy Carter's White House counsel.
Yeah.
And so I trucked on over to Lloyd Cutler at Wilmer Cutler and Pickering, and I go in the office, and Shelby Quast is there with Lloyd Cutler, and Lloyd says, "Yeah, Paul, Mort called and said I have to give you free legal advice. This is Shelby. Shelby's my senior associate. She's going to give you free legal advice." And our first pro bono law firm was Wilmer Cutler and Pickering, which was one of the top 5 DC firms.
Wow.
And my lawyer was Lloyd Cutler, and so we'd only been in existence for 2 or 3 years. But when we went on, when clients rang us up, and they said, "Well, tell us about PLPG." I'm like, "Well, we get pro bono work from Lloyd Cutler and Mort Abramowitz and Richard Goldstone, the prosecutor for Yugoslavia, former at the time, are the 2 co-chairs of our advisory board." We sounded really amazing. And Mike and I and my friends from Cambridge and Office of Legal Advisor, rubbing 2 pencils together to create legal memos. But I realized that folks are willing to share their idiosyncrasy credit, share their goodwill, share their professional presence with young people. I was still, intellectually a kid at the time, but they were willing to invest and to vouch. And then with Malcolm Grant from the across the pond vouching for us, and Jiri from Geneva. So my track for my career, I tapped into to be on the advisory board. That really helped give us that gravitas. And then we just stayed within our lane of cranking out, legal analysis for clients that needed it.
Did you know from early on that this was going to work? This is going to be a long-term thing?
Oh no, this was a pocket NGO. Once Mort told me to get a job, I went on the teaching market, and I ended up at American University, at the law school, and at the School of International Service, and we had this, Public International Law and Policy Group, a pocket NGO, which gave us the vehicle to bring in law firm assistants, to have other folks, faculty help. And then one day, BZ Dallas, who's at the university, came to me and said, "You know what? We should get a grant to go advise on the Sri Lankan peace process, and I should go there and be the chief of party." I'm like, "What the heck is a chief of party?" We applied for a grant, and we ended up getting it. when we talk later to the grants officer, he said, "Oh yeah, I gave it to you because you asked for like 20% of what everybody else asked." And I thought, well, hell, I can't pass
Wow.
that up. We didn't know about overhead and indirect and all
Yeah.
these other things. And Beezy, packed her bags and went to Sri Lanka and advised on the peace process.
Wow.
And since then, we've been involved in 3 dozen peace talks. We've had offices in Baghdad, and Juba, and Tripoli, and Cairo, and in Armenia, and Tbilisi, in Georgia. We've been in Sana'a in Yemen. We've been all over the globe. Based upon BZ coming to my office and saying, you know what, you should get a grant and hire somebody to actually work for you, and then it's taken off in such a dramatic fashion over the last 30 years.
That's amazing. What a legacy too. I mean, the impact that you've had over time, and and you can say you can say that there might have been other reasons why people were willing to be generous with their time and legal advice and all that. But you and Mike from the beginning, you impressed the hell out of everybody. I mean, the two of you are so brilliant, but also like had integrity, and that was certainly my lesson from that time in my life was how much people in Washington, contrary to at the time what people would have thought, really valued integrity. Like if there were good people who were working hard, trying to do the right thing and were honest, people really respected that. And you guys developed a really strong reputation from the beginning for that.
One of the things I do with my students now is I ask them, what is your wow? I'm like, well, what do you mean? I'm like, what do your friends say about you? Oh, I know Steve. Wow, he has integrity. He's thoughtful. He shares his idiosyncrasy credit with his peer group. What is your wow? Because I never thought about that. And
Mm.
then 7 or 8 years ago, I started asking people. You get old enough, you can say, so what is my wow? And Mort Abramowitz, I said, so Mort, thinking back, why the heck did you offer me a job as a senior research associate at the Carnegie Endowment? He says, because you built things. I'm like, what do you mean? It's like you showed up and you said, you just built a global pro bono law firm as if it was nothing. And I was like, oh wow. And he was like, yeah. And so for young professionals to be thinking about, is it having integrity? Is it being intellectually entrepreneurial? Is it building things? It's not what you think in terms of, you got to get the grades, you got to get the degrees, you got to get the internships, but it's what is that core essence, and then being wicked smart. Yeah, I'm amazed at how many young professionals are wicked smart and embracing the fact that they're wicked smart.
Mm.
And then just being nice people. It's important for young people. I think they somehow oftentimes think they need to conform to look, we all grew up, we grew up in Perry Mason. Now it's Suits, it's Boston
Right.
Legal, it's
Right.
LA Law, whatever your genre is. And none of them are nice people.
Yeah. Yeah. But
So,
character
but
does matter. I mean, people do value that. Like people want to work with good people, right? They want to work with people they can trust, right? And your clients want to know that they can trust you. I mean, that's again, why was Mo, the Bosnian foreign minister, trusting you so much at Dayton? You did good work. You were honest, trustworthy. He knew the quality and the accuracy of the work was going to be there. Like that matters to people, you know.
and it matters to the extent that they put you on their delegation. So I showed up at the airport and they sent a captain to pick me up and drive me. And they said, "Oh man, you gave us a huge headache." I'm like, "Why?" And it's like, "Your last name is Williams and you're on the Bosnian delegation. You do the math. We wonder what we shopped you around to the Americans, to the Europeans. Nobody would take you. And so we figured, okay, you must actually be on the Bosnian delegation. But to be there in their delegation meetings, meeting with President Izbegovic, et cetera, yeah, you're right. They need that sense of trust, uh, and an understanding of attorney-client relationships. I can always tell when our pro bono clients have finally grasped that I'm their lawyer is when they ask me to help them fix their parking tickets. Because the diplomats always have stacks of parking tickets. Our lawyer, fix my parking ticket. I'm like, yep, you now understand what I do, and I do not do parking.
Um, Hey, over the years being a professor, how has that job changed for you? And both in terms of like the way you think about your role as a professor and a mentor, and how the institution of higher education has changed as well.
Hmm. When I first started teaching, I thought my obligation was to transfer knowledge. And then at you had your book and you had your professor who gave lecture notes. I was actually had lunch the other day with John Thompson, who was my teaching assistant the second year I was teaching. And as my teaching assistant, I said, John, I need you to come to class. I need you to take notes. He said, sure. Why? I said, well, if you haven't noticed, I don't actually have any lecture notes. So I thought the easiest way of having lecture notes is if I lecture and you take my notes, and then I can use those year after year after year.
Love that.
So that's how prepared I was for being a professor. But it was all about certain knowledge transfer. Now it's about, as you said earlier, making their brains hurt, making them think, making them be intellectually entrepreneurial, and skills. So I have a 3-hour class. We do negotiation simulations. Then we have a conversation about it. We'll do a tabletop exercise. We have a conversation. And then I do the last 20 minutes professional development, how to attend an event downtown, how to flip a business card, how to manage a meeting, how to have a strategic communications presence, not a social media, but a strategic communications presence, nothing to do with international law, and only 20 minutes. But they come out knowing a lot about the niche of how to lawyer peace, how to do negotiations, but a whole lot of a broader spectrum of how to think, how to solve conundrums, how to be intellectually engaged. And one of the things that I am very clear with my students now is they can come to class for every negotiation. Every class has a 45-minute simulation. We also do 2 Fridays with 5-hour simulations. They can be a different person every single time. They can move down the astrological chain and be, a Taurus, a Gemini, a Leo, and try it on for size as their professional negotiating persona and see what's comfortable, and then adopt different pieces. Because they'll like, well, no, I'm this person and this is how I negotiate. I'm like, no. You're a lawyer for a client. And sometimes your client needs blue, sometimes red, sometimes purple. You should try those on, see what's most comfortable, and then have an eclectic mix for each client that you have so that you can best serve their needs. So things like that to get them to, I feel a little bit like, well, geez, I should teach them some international law. Then I realized, what the hell? I only, 30 years ago, I took one class. What do I know? They can't ask ChatGPT. So if they can ask ChatGPT, I shouldn't bother be teaching it. I want to teach them the things that helps them to develop those skills, that makes critical thinking muscle memory, that it operates like muscle memory. And you know what? They are so good at this. Once you unleash the rules and the constraints on how they think they're supposed to learn, they really get into it, and they really do test out different brain muscles than they might not have used in earlier experiences.
I love that. And I love you brought up ChatGPT because, it's like an earthquake in the education field, and you can't teach the way you did before. It's going to revolutionize so many different industries, and some jobs are going to go away, and the people who can use it as a tool and also who are developing the skills that you're teaching kids, those are the people who are still going to have something relevant for at least 5 years, probably.
So Steve, I require my students to use ChatGPT. It drives the university absolutely bonkers because they're trying to create all these guardrails. I'm like, well, I just require my students, and I only give 2 grades. I give A's and C's. And here's why it is. If you give me a B+ paper, I know ChatGPT wrote it, and I'm going to give you a C. What you need to do is write an A- paper and work with Chat to make it an A+ paper, and then I'm going to give you an A, so I don't get accused of grade inflation. And it's your thought partner. You should chat with ChatGPT. Don't ask it to write your paper. And then, of course, the narrative is, oh, chat, artificial intelligence is going to put lawyers out of business. I'm like, no. Lawyers who use artificial intelligence are going to put lawyers who don't use artificial intelligence out of business. Right. Don't ask it to write your brief and make up quotes. Write your own damn brief and give it to Chat and ask it to improve it, or think through various things with Chat or whatever mechanism that you're using. But no, it's look, you and I were around when a Rolodex was actually a physical thing that flipped,
Yeah.
when you had to pay for long distance phone calls, when there was a thing called the fax machine, which was amazing. You and I both this.
Yeah.
What we do now with emails, we would fax people. And twice a week, I would go to the library in Cambridge and check my emails. Imagine the mindfulness of that, checking your emails twice a week.
Right.
Those were the good old days. So when I say these stories, one of my students 2 years ago said, "Oh yeah, my grandfather used to use that." I said, "Whoa, whoa, whoa, whoa! You can say your parents, you can't say your grandparents. You know, let's just stick with your parents. Used to do X, Y, or Z."
So then what we were talking about this before we started recording. Given the other big thing that is an earthquake right now is obviously the early weeks of the Trump administration and what's happening in terms of Doge and, you know, downsizing and in some cases trying to destroy certain government departments. A lot of your students are at American because they want to work in the government or in non-governmental organizations or, you know, other organizations that are related to the government. So what are you telling them, or how is that affecting the way you teach and mentor them?
Yeah. Wait, it's only been a few weeks. It seems like 3 years.
Yeah.
The no, I it's they're they don't believe me when I say this. They're at a very opportune time. They have 5 decades ahead of them. They're ensconced in a university for 1, 2, or 3 more years. And a number of my students are JDMA students, so that gives them an extra year. And yes, their trajectory may have been, I'm going to go work for the federal government or for a nonprofit doing development work. But they have 5 decades to become self-actualized, if that's making a difference, if that's making money, if that's doing whatever it is that they're interested in doing. They have 5 decades to do that. And their skills that they're learning now in law school and in the master's program are transferable. So 7 years from now, we may be on a trajectory where there are a lot of federal government jobs or not. But you don't have to focus on that particular job. You want to focus on the skill set.
Right.
And quite frankly, the Trump administration is a boom for, you know, lawyers. See it, sue it, change it. There are over 100 instances of litigation at the moment against the Trump administration. Not saying that this is why we should be excited about it, but being a lawyer is empowering to make change, empowers people to make change. Now, it may not be what they thought about when they came into law school, but as you and I said, you know, we're in the early 90s, and all of a sudden Soviet Union dissolves. Wait, what? Yugoslavia dissolves and goes into conflict. Wait, what? Things are always in transition. This is just another flavor of that transition, and looking over the horizon enough to realize, oh, I've got this skill set I can utilize to challenge, or I can get out of Dodge for a number of years and go to state, local, go back to the hometown, go abroad. There's all kinds of demand for lawyers and for master students in the United States and around the globe, and just taking it in stride, because 12 years from now it's going to be something else.
Right.
And another 10 years after that, it's going to be something else. And so having that resilience, that mindfulness to pivot.
Yeah. Being adaptable and being a good learner is probably going to be the most important thing for having a good career, right? And your example, I mean, again, not only with what happened back in the early 90s, but your whole career path or careers that you've built, a great example of how you can have whatever plan you think you have in your head when you're young, and life and the world are going to, you know, throw you curveballs and give you forks in the road, and you can't anticipate where you're going to go. But if you can be adaptable and be a good learner and self-directed and a good person, then you'll be all right, probably.
And be surrounded by supportive friends and family and people who are intellectually curious as well. One of the phrases I've come to use lately, and I have to be cautious. I say, look, I'm very focused on constructing my own reality. And they're like, what, like a sci-fi reality? You live on a moon base, or what is this reality? Are there unicorns in your reality? I'm like, no, 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 no. We talk about agency and how our clients and how countries and etc. We all have agency. We can all trim our social media. We can all invest time and energy into amazing friends. We can invest time and energy into family, and we can actually build the reality. Now it exists in the larger reality of course, but you can take ownership. You can take control over what makes you happy. I use this when it's been a number of years since I've actually been physically present at a faculty meeting because we can we can do hybrid. And somebody once mentioned, you might want to actually come to a faculty meeting rather than just dial in with your Paddington Bear emoji. And I said, nope, nope. In my reality, all faculty meetings are virtual. And it's like, you know what? I can actually control that. So
Yeah.
all faculty meetings are virtual in my reality. And I can actually get a lot more done. So yeah, no, I think and again, students are not young professionals aren't told that. They're told there's a system, there's an ethos, there's a pathway, there's conformity. Yeah, that's all true. But a young professional can construct your own reality. Again, operating within a larger context.
Right.
But do what makes you happy. And one I want to be cautious of your time, but one of the things that I learned early on, Ms. Guzman taught me this. She actually called my parents at the parent teachers, my fifth grade teacher, and she said, "Hey, look, Paul, his handwriting sucks. He's gonna if he's not gonna be a lawyer, he's gonna be a doctor because he can't read his handwriting." And every day during story time, they were reading The Hobbit. During story time or reading advancement time, I would get sent to the lab to practice my handwriting. And she said, "You know what? He's never going to learn to write. But his imagination is pretty amazing. He'd get more sitting here with the rest of the students having me read The Hobbit to him than he would trying to get his thumb out of how he holds his pen." And the thing that she mentioned to my mom and my father was have him focus on what he's good at and either ignore or just simply compensate for what he's not good at. And I was only 10 years old at the time, but my parents, that stuck with them. And they would always emphasize, no, 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 take what you're a 4-star at and make it a 5 or a 6. And if you're a 2 or 3-star, yeah. Just don't specialize in that. Don't go into the printing business or the visual art business or whatever the graphic. Don't become a graphic artist.
Yeah.
Play to your strengths, because everyone comes and says, "Oh, I've got to compensate for the things that I'm not." It's like, no, 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 no. Just park those, figure out what you're good at, and become excellent at what you're good at.
And surround yourself with people who are good at the things that you're a 2 or a 3 at, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and then they'll. So Mike Scharf, this is probably TMI for your program. I'm deeply introverted on the Myers-Briggs. I'm 17 introverted and 1 extroverted.
Wow.
Mike Scharf is all, yeah. I'm I'm a Gemini, so I just have conversations with myself. I don't need to socially interact with anyone else. I've always got a conversation going on. But Mike is completely extroverted, which is why we make such a great pair. Every year we go twice out to Colorado to go skiing, and we get on the chairlift, and I'm always sitting on the end because I can just look out at the trees and the snow. And Mike will ask the 2 people next to us about themselves. He'll then tell them about himself, and then he'll tell them about me. And I'm just like, yeah, whatever, thumbs up with the speed. And he carries on the entire conversation all the way up with these people up the chairlift, and I don't have to do anything. So that's a little bit of a metaphor for what you just said, Steve, which is surround yourself by people who are good at what you're not that good at, and then together you have a pool of excellence.
Yeah. That sounds like a perfect place to stop. Paul, thank you so much. This is delightful and entertaining and just brilliant as you are. And I just want to thank you. I want to thank you for everything you did with and for us back in the early 90s, and for having the vision and the chutzpah to create an organization that could do so much good around the world. Really appreciate that. You're a rare breed. So thank you.
Well, Steve, thank you for having me on the program and giving me a chance to entertain your listeners. I remember when we first met, when you were my client, at the State Department days, and when you resigned, you stood on principle and you said enough. When you worked on the Dissent Channel memorandum, and then you just didn't like disappear. You created the Balkan Action Council and were engaged. I thought, oh, this is how it's supposed to work. You're supposed to believe in things. You're supposed to have integrity, and you're supposed to advocate ferociously for the good guys.
Yeah.
So you were deeply inspiring as a plucky young lawyer who's just happy to be in Washington. I'm like, whoa, okay, this is how real people operate. This is inspiring. So thank you for that, Steve.
Means a lot. Thank you, Paul. So thanks again to Paul Williams for that great conversation. I just admire the heck out of him. I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. And thinking back on those days when we worked together in the State Department initially, and then on the activism side of things, one of the highlights that I think about from that time is that I was surrounded by people who were so brilliant and people of integrity and just good human beings, and it was such a gift for me, and important because during those times, it was, when we were in the State Department working on Bosnia, like, it was so demoralizing and frustrating, and I wasn't a part. He misremembered a little bit. I wasn't a part of drafting the big dissent memo that got front page of the New York Times and all that. I arrived in the office shortly thereafter, but it was an incredibly demoralizing time. But one of the saving graces was that there were these amazing people like Paul Williams and Marshall Freeman Harris and the late John Western, who were inspirational to me, and great colleagues and friends, and inspired me. So it's great thinking back on that piece of it. And then the same thing as an activist. We just had so many good people around the country and around the world who were trying to stop the genocide and create peace and justice moving forward. And Paul was at the center of that. And I'm very grateful for everything that he did. And I'm also very grateful for the last part of our conversation when we were talking about education and AI and finding your wow. I thought that part was great. He's so insightful, right? His emotional intelligence is off the charts. And I think that, that part in and of itself is worth sharing with as many people as you can. Particularly people who are, starting off in adulthood, probably, teens, 20s, 30s. But I think for everybody, I mean, I found it, to be a really interesting part of the conversation. And I think about that stuff a lot. So I hope you'll share it with a bunch of people. And thanks for tuning in. Next week is episode 20. Wow. When I first started the podcast, I heard that like hardly anybody makes it to episode 20. Well, one more to go. So as long as I don't screw it up over the next week, we're going to make it to 20. So I hope you'll tune in for that episode. Thanks again. Hope you have a great rest of your day, and I look forward to continuing the conversation. All right. That was awesome. You're
Thanks.
amazing. You are so great at this. Oh my God. Yeah. Wonderful.
Oh, thanks. I enjoyed that. That was fun. It's always, trying to be practical, but go through memory lane and make it
Yeah.
tangible for the listeners.
Yeah. It's inspirational. I just think the whole thing, your whole story, it's like so many lessons in it that I would love everybody to go away with. Just fantastic. Yeah.
And I know you have to go as well. I don't know if I was raised by Midwesterners. You don't tell people how much you make. You don't tell, when they all had security clearances because it was aerospace and they're all working for,
Right.
the government. And you just keep it in. And so it took me a long while with my student. At first, I was like, all right, here's the 12 things we're going to learn. Boom, boom, boom. Professor, how did you get in? Well, I studied hard and I applied for jobs. Now I can't stop telling stories. So like, are we going to learn anything about international law? Or just hear about your childhood experiences, Paul? So it took me a long time to do that. But man, they really like that
Yeah.
tangible, oh, okay, you had no idea what you were doing before you ended up doing these things. It chills them out.
It's liberating because they feel they get asked from the time they're like, 10, what are you going to do when you grow up? They think they have to have all the answers. And I'm still figuring it out. I'm on my fourth career. Like,
Well, that's because you're a Gemini, Steve. You're a Gemini,
exactly.
so you can do that. My kid, I'll let you go on. My kid did this. She was in middle school and she decided she was going to go to business school. And and I said, one of my relatives said, why? And she says, well, if I tell them I want to be a lawyer, they say, oh, just like your dad, which a middle school girl doesn't want to be just like your dad. Or if I say something liberal arts, oh, there's no jobs in that. Or if I say medicine, oh, that's and if I say business, they all smile and nod. So I say business. And she ended up actually being in business, but and she was very strategic. She was like, they all, I'm in seventh grade. They all want to know what I'm going to be when I
Right.
grow up.
Crazy.
So yeah, I say business, and then all the Girl Scout moms and dads smile and are happy, and they stop asking you.
Mission accomplished. I
Yeah.
love it. Listen,
All right, Steve.
give my best
Thanks
to
for
Mike.
I will do that. Yeah, I'm
And,
talking to him later. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'll give my best to him. Give your best to him.
Yes.
But
And
thanks
if
for
you're
doing
ever
this.
up here, let me know.
I will keep you posted if I get up to Boston.
Yeah.
It won't be in the winter. It'll be in the spring or the fall.
Yeah. This is wonderful.
All right. Great.
Thank you, Paul.
Thanks, Steve.
Appreciate
Take
it.
care.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening. If today's episode resonated with you, imagine what we could accomplish together in a one-to-one coaching session. Visit integrityandjoy.com to learn more and book your free consultation. Let's create the life you've been striving for.